these are for the panelists, so please. Yeah, Roger is coming soon.
Well, we should start.
Yeah, I have one. I have one myself. Yeah. Welcome everyone. Yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce the panelists today. So we have Geoffrey Irving from the UK Safety Institute, now called UK Security Institute. Geoffrey was for many years at DeepMind, also at Google Brain, has done very foundational work on the safety. We have seen like a lot of safety work was very empirical, but Geoffrey is one of those people who is also thinking about safety problems very theoretically, and it's a pleasure to have him. Also Don Song, who is a native here, who is at Berkeley. In that sense. Yeah, Don has been working on safety, privacy, security for many years now. And she's a big voice in the space of agents. So her agents MOOC has, I heard, 40,000 students. Is that correct? Over 23,000, almost close to 40,000, yeah. And she's also ACM fellow and also won many awards. Yoshua doesn't need an introduction, so I will skip this one. Umesh gave a great introduction. Roger. Roger Grosse is a professor at University of Toronto. He was working mostly on the machine learning side of things, and recently got much into safety, and he's also at Anthropic now, 50-50 at, and he's trying to understand where does these models get their capability from, and trying to point out to the training data. And he's also, he just won last year Canada Outstanding Researcher in the computer science. All right, yeah, so let's get started on the topics today. So it will be continuation of what we already had here. This program is all about large language models, and the second workshop had a panel on artificial general intelligence, and people must be thinking about artificial general intelligence, and this workshop also focused more on superintelligence. So I just want to get the sense of the panelists on what is artificial general intelligence and what is superintelligence. Should we aim for one versus the other one? And yeah, what are your thoughts on?
I think these are like labels we use in a fuzzy way. In reality, from the perspective of social impact, it doesn't really matter that an AI is like at human level or beyond on this task, like on everything. What matters is whether the AI has capabilities that could be harmful in wrong hands or of its own accord, and it doesn't need to be like as good as humans at everything. And in fact, it's very likely that there will be no AGI moment, because we'll have systems that, I mean, we already have systems that are superhuman in some ways. Like, do you know somebody who knows 200 languages and can, write prose in all of these, and and basically can answer any technical question in like almost all domains, including doing your own recipes. I mean, what is important is these evaluations that focus on the capabilities that can have either positive impact because we want to deploy them, or negative impact because we want to prevent them. And then we need to measure, like, okay, on this capability, the AI has this kind of strengths and weaknesses, so we can take the right decisions.
Just to add on that, current techniques of next word prediction, this is how we build current language models, just predicting what word comes next. And also, if you take other modalities, just figuring out what is the missing piece given some input. Is that enough for us to get to superintelligence and the kind of things that you talked about? This maybe for Yoshua. You can just continue on that and then leave it to.
All right. I don't know. before ChatGPT, I thought, oh, the techniques we have, there's no way we're gonna like more or less pass the Turing test. I was wrong. I still think that we are missing some important conceptual elements. I've been working on causality, for example, for many years, and like, okay, that is weak on this right now. And I don't know if it's going to be some incremental path that addresses these concerns, or somebody was going to come up with something completely different. Right now, the way industry is doing it is incremental. That we can say.
A couple of things. So one is that I don't think, the thing to say that it's, I think, with confidence is we don't have any confident reason to believe there is a ceiling that kicks in at kind of across the various cognitive capabilities at human level. And I think one reason for that is that like humans are not at the level at which humans are at is essentially the minimum level required to establish a collective kind of cooperative kind of technological civilization. And so we've kind of evolved and got smarter and smarter over like the millions of years. And then we reached some point at which we could expand across the world. And almost no evolutionary time has passed. So we haven't saturated, probably. And I think there's no kind of strong reason to believe that there's another saturation point for AI. I think you can't be confident in the reverse direction, but that's not reassuring for this stuff. I think one other thing to say is that I think people have often present a kind of a magical version of superintelligence where it can do these magical things. And I think we're at a CS theory place. I think there's a very kind of mundane picture of superintelligence, which is, I mean, sort of hypothetical superintelligence, which is just faster, more illegible, more shorthand. And then in particular domains is kind of domain superhuman, which we already see for AlphaGo and protein folding and other games. And moreover, I think this is modelable. So you can imagine a thing which is just reasoning in some standard sense, plus speed and oracles to model heuristics and so on. And so I think there's a real potential for theory to engage with this idea in a very kind of concrete, mathematical, mundane sense that I think reflects part of how things might go.
I think, yes. I mean, both, I think, I agree with what Yoshua and Geoffrey said. And I think right now, we don't really see a ceiling. And in fact, I think actually we are still just at the beginning. So the moment we saw that the pre-training wasn't scaling much, then people started to scale inference time compute. And I think this is just one example. Actually, there are many, even low-hanging fruit areas that we haven't explored. So the data side can be much better improved, and the RL can be much better improved. And also, so now people start to talk more about continuous update, continuous learning, and so on. These we haven't even started much yet. So there's a lot, actually, that haven't been done that could be done to continue with the progress. So I think it will be very exciting to see in the next coming couple of years for the progress.
Yeah, I think I agree with what the other panelists have said, but I think I'll also add, since you asked the question about superintelligence, I think it's hard to think about what thresholds are important for superintelligence, because whether an AI is a bit less capable of a human or a bit more capable, that doesn't seem to matter so much. But I like to think about the important threshold as civilization level AI, when the aggregate kind of intellectual output of AI matches the aggregate intellectual output of humanity. And such a threshold would be very concerning for multiple reasons. I think one is that you might have an uncontrolled intelligence explosion. That's something that has never happened before and could be, probably be extremely disastrous if it happens without us preparing for it. And I guess the other would be that I think a lot of why current day AIs are so benign is that their best strategy in a lot of situations is to predict what a smart human would do in a given situation, and humans tend to do reasonable things. And once the AIs have exceeded the collective capacity of humanity, it's no longer their best strategy to predict what we would do. They could figure out their own solution, and then they lose that maybe ethical grounding. And so we would hope that their wisdom scales as fast as their intelligence.
Thank you. Since you talked about some of the risks, yeah, some of the risks that you mentioned right now, these are projections. We don't know whether these things are going to happen, like AI, whether AI can reach the scaling is not clear, like the panel mentioned. But as a researcher, like, what are your particular reasons? What are the most important risks for you when you think about AI safety, and when you're working day to day? Okay, this is the most risky thing that might happen, and I'm working towards that. Or this is the current risk that I'm very excited about, I'm working towards that.
So first I want to sort of reject the premise of the question about ranking the risks in some like stack ranking order. I think that everyone might have their own individual ranking, but I think we spend far too much time as a world squabbling over which one is the more important risk. And so the way I like to say it is like at DeepMind, my kind of day job was a mixture of catastrophic risks, sort of dishonesty, and sort of existing risks, sort of fairness and bias and so on. At AC, my day job is mostly catastrophic risks from misuse and loss of control, which is like what I spend most of the hours of the day on. Not entirely, but I think it's more important to start with respect for kind of a large diversity of risks than to kind of quibble about the ordering of things.
Thank you.
So I can give a couple examples. So one area that spending a lot of time on in terms of the AI risks is in cyber. So recently we've done some work on actually analyzing the impact of frontier AI on the landscape of cybersecurity. So this area is particularly important given that AI as a dual-use technology, it can help both attackers and defenders. So the question is, who will AI help more, attacker side or the defender side? And also, cybersecurity, I think in terms of AI risks, is particularly a very important, realistic one, given that today already we are seeing a lot of attacks, and the attackers have diverse incentives why they want to do the attacks. And also, as the recent progress that we see in coding, in reasoning capabilities for these models, these increased capabilities directly impact in cyber areas. So with our analysis, it showed that even though today frontier AI does not have much impact directly on, for example, finding vulnerabilities, doing exploits, other than it does have a lot of impact already on attacking humans, basically, for phishing, social engineering, large-scale phishing, social engineering. But as the AI capability improves in coding and so on, it will directly impact the cyber security risk space. And with our analysis, for a number of reasons, given the nature of symmetry between attacks and defense and so on, like our prediction is that in the near term, AI is going to help attackers a lot more than defenders. And we hope that in the longer term, with various measures put in place, and also with the increased technology, AI can help defenders more than the attackers. But there is a question during the near-term period, what society should do, what also as researchers what we should do, and what model developers should do to really try to mitigate that risk.
Yeah.
So that's one main area that I have been focusing on, and another one that people don't talk so much about, but I do think actually going forward is going to have also like bigger and bigger impact on everyone. Is so recently we had a paper on studying essentially these models political leaning. So for example, whether they lean left or right, and which president candidates they want to vote for, and so on. And in the study did show that it has a political leaning. All these models do, and probably for most people, not surprisingly, leaning left. And also we did user studies with close to 1,000 users. And the study actually showed that through even just 5-10 conversations, actually the users, their political leaning can be shifted. So in the future, everyone will be talking, I mean, today already, everyone's talking with these LLMs and so on. And so they do actually have, they can have implicit these capabilities, our power to actually shape users' various views and so on. Like in our user study, we actually instructed the LLM not to explicitly try to persuade users, only just trying to answer users' questions. So I think in this, in general, in this area, there's a lot of things that we need to study as well.
Okay, so it seems like the two kinds of risks that we talked about, the risks that where humans have the intent, like this is the intent is actually come from humans, and then the other risk that you mentioned was the side effects. This is like we don't know if the AI intentionally is doing this or just like a side effect that
like social media, for example.
Yeah, yeah. So those are the risks, and Yoshua's talk also touched upon the other thing where the agent itself has the intent. Yeah, maybe on that, like, is that the main thing that you currently think about? And in the last slide, you also mentioned about the other risks, which seem particularly to me personally, are the biggest risks, where there will be adversarial players who is using this technology with their intent, and that's the risk that I'm most worried about.
That's fine. There are many issues that need human brains to work on them. It's like when we do research, we're not asking, everyone should do this research like this, solve this problem. We do need to work on many different fronts. And there could be synergies. On the technical side, a lot of the safety problems, the short-term ones, like, from fairness, discrimination, disinformation to like catastrophic misuse and loss of control, they can all use better guardrails, technical guardrails like what I've been talking about. Like if we can better predict that something will violate some safety specification, that could be useful across the board. So that's just an example to say that, yes, you can choose your battles, but it's also interesting to see that some technical questions can help us answer many of these. And it's also true on the political side. Like there are organizations that are fighting against any kind of state intervention. And well, that's going to be preventing us from dealing with a lot of the social impact issues, whatever it is, up to extinction, but starting at the things that are already happening and already bad. So I think that the people who care about negative social impact can work together to try to convince governments that they need oversight. They need to know what these models are capable of doing. They need to see evaluations. They need to be able to say no when it's appropriate. And there could be different mechanisms. We talked about insurance earlier. There are many possible mechanisms, and we should explore that space. But, again, that is a scenario where we can have specialized solutions and also solutions that can apply across a broad spectrum of risks. And of course, personally, I've made the choice to focus on loss of human control because the severity is so high, right? It's potentially the end of humanity. Hopefully, it might be smaller size accidents. And we don't know the probabilities, but because of the precautionary principle, like the right thing to do is to be cautious. And that means paying attention to those risks, even if we're not really sure, what's going to happen. And I think studying scientifically the causal, the reasons why these things could happen is essential. I mean, maybe we're going to find out that, hey, it's going to be fine for these and these reasons, but we can't just hope that it's going to be fine.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah, so I guess I agree with a couple of the previous panelists who broke the risks down into cases of human malfeasance and cases of rogue AI. The AI is intentionally doing something that it knows we don't want. I would add maybe a third category of unintended consequences. I think Don also alluded to this. But this maybe comes into play more when the AIs are very, very powerful, such that they can actually develop new technologies. Because if we were to speed up technological progress, right? If you think about the past century, there were some technologies with the potential for a huge catastrophe, like nuclear weapons and bioweapons and things like that, as well as other like public health disasters like thalidomide. And if you accelerated technological progress by a factor of 10, then all these things would happen 10 times more frequently. We might not be prepared for them as a society. And if the AIs are doing their risk management by trying to predict what a 2025 human would think intuitively, that might not work so well off distribution. And so I think that's another category of risk that we have to think about down the line.
Yeah. So my struggle as a researcher in this area is that the upside of AI is huge, and it's only since 2022 probably the entire world realized that AI is a big thing, and it is very powerful. And if you think about the impact of AI, it's mainly through LLMs that we have seen this kind of impact. But there are many areas where AI could make huge impact. Is medical, just analyzing those. Anything where there's a lot of data, but we still don't understand yet properly some of these things. So some of the other data is in even videos, images, and speech. All these modalities, if we combine those, we might be. So it's. I was reading just how much economic impact would have, like 7 trillion impact and so on. So, and when I'm working on these applications, when I'm trying to build AI, I'm not always thinking about the safety side of these things, because it's not something trivial. Like you're trying to improve, let's say, a question answering system. You're thinking mainly about the positive use case of this. And as a researcher, I intentionally might contribute to the other dual side, which is the negative side, right? So how to deal with this thing? I mean, there are many researchers in the room and so on. So what are the safety things that we have to think? Like, can we leave some of these issues to regulators and policymakers, or should we make this as a part of our agenda itself?
I think it's very obvious. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think if you're asking yourself that question about whether to focus on some positive benefit or safety, I think it's easier to zoom out to like what is the distribution of researchers covering these topics across the world. And I think that distribution is just overwhelmingly skewed in the wrong direction towards more people trying to work on capabilities, probably even more on general capabilities than on societally beneficial ones. But I think if you, with that perspective, I think if you're asking yourself that question, probably the correct answer, zoomed out, is to work on some safety risk that you consider important. Even if you were thinking of yourself as just a small individual, just by yourself in isolation, it wouldn't be clear what to do.
I just want to add a complementary to this. Computer scientists at all levels, undergrad, grad, researchers, faculty, generally don't have a culture, an education that prepares them for thinking about the social impact of their work. And in other scientific disciplines, it's different. If you're a nuclear engineer, I can tell you that safety takes a lot of room, and you are modeling and thinking about these things. And if you're in the medical domain, it's very, very important, and you're thinking about the psychological aspects, the sociological aspects, and because our work in machine learning up to now was not really having a big impact in society, our institutions, universities haven't been focusing on this, but it needs to change. Like, we need to get the right education in social sciences and humanities so that it's ingrained in us. How could that be misused?
I mean,
What
this
could
is
happen that we
already-
did not intend? And so on.
This already happening with machine learning papers. Like we have
Yeah,
we have
but it's
sections
like
where we actually
tick the box right now.
We have
True.
a requirement in our new college that undergraduates have to have something on ethics,
So like I mean, we will go through all that process. Like we will get the courses and so on, but at the end, we want to increase the capabilities as well, right? Like this is because the upside is big, and
It's lesser.
Yeah, it's big, but it's still less than like losing everything. Like, what's the point of being capable of curing cancer if we're all dead?
but even
Yeah.
okay, yeah. it's-
Yeah, I mean, I was going to add that AI safety research doesn't have to come at the expense of AI capabilities, right? Because on a day-to-day basis, if you're doing safety research, you're probably trying to figure out better ways to align the models, or better ways to measure if they're aligned, or if they have secret ulterior motives and things like that. That's a way of getting better information that will help make deployment decisions. And that doesn't necessarily have to accelerate or decelerate things. And if we have a regulatory regime that does have kind of a precautionary principle at work, where you have to assure safety in order to be able to deploy a system, then safety research would kind of, in a sense, accelerate when you can have a certain level of capability. So I think, from a societal perspective, we do have this trade-off of, how do we value the progress from AI versus avoiding the risks. But when it comes to research on safety, it seems like a win-win situation.
Mhm. And I would like to add to that also. People sometimes, think about the safety is more on the non-enabler, actually on the slowdown side. But actually, I view safety as an enabler. So essentially, as we deploy AI technology in large scale, really, you can only do that when you have safety guarantees. And so there is an analogy, so safety is like the seatbelt. It's not there to slow down, it's there to actually make you go faster. So with the seatbelt, you can actually go faster. So I hope that going forward, yes, we can view safety more as enabler for society to better be able to better benefit from the power of AI. Without safety, you won't actually be able to really enjoy that benefit. So I think we want to actually think about safety in this positive way.
Though to push back a bit, there are trade-offs and creative frontiers that are non-degenerate. So I think you can't always do that.
So taking the analogy of car seat, right? As if I'm trying to learn a car, I would just not think about safety. I would just put the car seat because it's a rule. This is what I'm saying. Like if somebody comes up with rules and policies and everything, as AI researchers, do we still I work on safety, by the way. I'm I'm also talking about the other 70% of my research where I'm trying also to improve the capabilities. So where I can freely think about improving the capabilities, where I have already all these bells and whistles or whatever it is, and freely think about the capabilities.
I want to maybe talk about a related issue. So we had these Stop AI people who came here to wake us up. And there's also arguments that we should just stop because the risks are too large. But because of the upside that you're talking about, it's going to be very difficult to do that. There's competition between corporations, there's competition between countries. And we should do everything we can so that we reduce the risks, that we stop the things that are dangerous, but we should also consider the possibility, which is, in my opinion, the greater possibility that unless there is a big accident and people wake up, the world is going to continue building more and more dangerous AI systems. And so if that's a plausible scenario, we would be better off if we have, technical safety solutions, which we don't have in a satisfactory way right now. It would not solve all the problems. As I said, we also need the political solutions, but I think even gaining a bit of time, because things are happening too quickly, would be helpful.
Yeah.
I guess one thing to add to that is that, so AC is working on kind of mitigation work, including alignment. And one success case for that is we help either via funding or doing direct research solve the problem in part or in full. And another is that we map it well enough to understand that, in fact, it's not working very well and we're not making progress. And then we can kind of more legibly communicate to policymakers and the public and so on that we're not there yet with confidence.
Well, I think we can already say we're not there yet.
But apparently not well enough to convince
Yes.
all the people.
I have more questions, but because of time, we might have to move on to the audience. I see a lot of hands raising. Yeah. Can I have one of these? Yes. Let's get started with you. Come next to you.
Hi. So a recent op-ed in the New York Times by Tressie McMillan Cotton made a compelling case that AI is mediocre or mid. There are also good counter-arguments to the claims of extreme upside or downside to future AI, which I'm guessing you're all aware of, and I'm not going to rehash them here because I don't want this to take like 20 minutes. But how would you respond to those critiques?
That might be true, and if so, this is all going to be fine. But maybe not.
Yeah.
So related to Siva's recent question, I wanted to ask about how, as researchers, we can really, how you think about steering your work in the field towards outcomes that are actually beneficial. So to make it more concrete, like in Yoshua's talk just now, like many components of the work, like the developing this amortized inference piece that, might plausibly be used just to make generically better reasoning models in addition to whatever monitor use cases related to safety you might want to use it for. And it seems like in the history of people thinking about the safety side of AI, there's been a lot of cases where the net outcome seems to be to just accelerate the field as a whole with sort of marginal benefits for safety. Arguably, the sort of history around some of the big AI labs has lots of cases of this sort of thing. And it seems like in all of the work of the panelists, Roger, Geoffrey, Dawn, Yoshua, there's many components that are sort of a frame shift away from just broadly being useful for accelerating the progress of AI without meaningful gains on the safety that you're worried about. So how do you think about avoiding this case of doing work that you think is targeted for beneficial outcomes for safety, but ultimately ends up sort of pushing the scenario that you are worried about?
I struggle with that every day. Is this working?
It's not working.
I struggle with that every day. It's difficult because for any particular action, as in a particular choice of what I'm going to be working on and what I'm going to do with this. For example, do I publish? Do I put out open source code? These kinds of decisions. And if I publish, what do I publish and what do I not publish? There are pros and cons, even just looking at the safety side. It's not obvious. So let me give you one reason that has been crossing my mind a lot in the last few months. If the timeline to really dangerous AI is short, there's not enough time to do the safety research that is needed. So, and the short timeline is the most dangerous thing from the point of view of global catastrophic effects. So if I publish something that's going to increase capability and safety, and we are under the most dangerous scenario, which is short timelines. I mean, if we're in the short timelines, that means the AI labs are pretty close anyways. And what it can do is accelerate the safety research, because everything that you publish is going to, be potentially picked up by other people who could do better. But yeah, it's very hard to come to a clear decision on and of course it's going to depend on the specifics of each contribution. And then when you do something, it's hard to anticipate, maybe it's just doesn't look very good in terms of the results I get, but somebody's going to do a little tweak and then it gets really strong in capability and then, oh no, right? It's very hard to answer these questions, but somehow we have to take those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I would just add to that is that I think there's maybe a tendency in the AI safety world to be very cautious about doing fundamental conceptual research that might kind of indirectly contribute to capabilities. And I think that if you're not at one of the major AGI labs and you're working on something that isn't explicitly motivated by improving AGI capabilities, and it has a genuine safety motivation, then I would expect that to be net beneficial, because there's a lot more effort being directed right now to advancing the capabilities, and it's being done by people at the labs who are working with the systems and know exactly where all the bottlenecks are, and so the pathway where you publish a conceptual paper and someone at one of the labs reads it and gets inspired and makes better decisions and so on is indirect enough that I think it's probably outweighed by the safety benefits. And I think the other argument I would make is that for problems of capabilities, conceptual advances are usually kind of optional, because you can always hill climb your way to better performance. Whereas for safety, it's usually not optional. The problems, they're pretty hard to solve with hill climbing, and you need more detailed mechanistic understanding of what's going on inside the system. And so I would expect conceptual advances that have some safety motivation to be net beneficial in general.
So I have a question on, so I wanted to get the panelists' thoughts on sort of open source and open weights models releases and the safety aspects of that. So for example, I think Yoshua mentioned policy frameworks for, sort of oversight on big players that make language models. And then there's this other angle. Yesterday, Nathan Perez talk, I think he seemed to allude to the fact that they would want to use their research to sort of give evidence that we should not have open weights releases. So there are all of these conflicting ideas. So I want to know what are the panelists' thoughts on open weights research? Because academic researchers like me, even for safety research, we depend on open weights models. So
I'm happy to answer. It's a very divisive question. It's a tricky question because, like the previous gentleman's question, right? How do you balance the pros and cons? And I think the right answer here is to be very methodical about evaluating the risks and the benefits. That's why we need these evals and the AI safety institutes to do their job. In general, as a rule of thumb, if an AI doesn't have extremely dangerous capabilities, there's a good chance that the advantages of sharing, even for AI safety research, outweigh the risks. But you have to look in the details, exactly what capabilities we're talking about, and it's going to be hard to weigh these things. In groups or countries where we're not at the frontier, there's going to be an economic advantage and a scientific advantage in sharing and open source. When you are playing with something new that could become dangerous in the wrong hands, or if we lose control, that's where you should be careful, and you should be doing your evaluation before you release, and maybe you decide to not release. Release open source. That would be my general recommendation, but it's hard, and people are very emotional about it, and it's understandable. I've been a fierce proponent of open source for all my research career. And then suddenly I'm facing something like the biologists who know that they have something in their hands that a virus that could kill millions of people. Do they publish it? Even though you've been thinking about open science as the best thing in the world for society for all your life, you have to question those assumptions. Sometimes it's not the right decision.
I'm a neutral civil servant, so I can't comment on details. But I think AC is doing one active project right now, in addition to doing kind of general capability evaluations for open source LLMs kind of over our time. There are specific mitigations people want to do for open source, specifically unlearning. And we are doing some work to evaluate how effective kind of the suite of current techniques are in that space. And so that will hopefully feed into the conversation, although I can't comment on what conclusion one should have.
Well, the conclusion for now is that it doesn't work satisfactorily.
That is correct.
And to add to that, so one thing is that so for example, the different frontier AI labs, they have their corresponding responsible scaling policy or a preparedness framework for these things, and also so recently we have actually with Jennifer and some others we have this. Proposal on a path for science and evidence-based AI policy also relates to what Yoshua mentioned. Parts of it mentions these things. Essentially, you have to do these evaluations to know the model's capability level and the dangerous capability levels and so on. So one thing is that currently for open source models, actually we don't really have something like this kind of responsible scaling policy. So that actually is hugely lacking. So that's, I think, as a first step towards actually developing a more rigorous framework on how we should.
I think Meta does actually have an RSP.
Yes, but although if you look at it, it's right. I think there's more room for improvements, right, for that. and also, right, Meta is doing that, but then there are other. Right, and the other companies. So overall, I think, right, for open sourcing, I think.
I just wanted to defend.
Yes, right, okay.
Something that I find kind of interesting is that, in computer science spaces, when people talk about scaling or thresholds, they're talking about it in terms of model size, compute, things like that. I think in traditional policy spaces, when they talk about scale, they're really talking about the proliferation and the degree of adoption of a particular technology. The Digital Services Act, when they talk about thresholding the risk of a particular technology, like an online platform, they talk about it in the sense of the number of active users is what determines what's a very large online platform versus not. And so I'm curious if that is, I know that's a cultural difference between policy and computer science in terms of how people think about what influences the impact of a model, but I think a lot of policymakers see the degree of AI adoption as the main point of concern, or a really under-considered point of concern. So, ChatGPT, got to 100 million users, much quicker than Instagram or any other app, and that's really concerning to a lot of policymakers. That really raised a lot of alarm bells. It was 6 months until the first, large language model pilots were released through, Epic, a electronic health record system across multiple hospitals, and that's much quicker than any other technology. So. And then, now, of course, we have large language models used by Doge and in the U.S. government, and Stromer's trying to pilot large language models use in the UK government, which Geoffrey, I'm sure you're aware of. And so just kind of the proliferation and the adoption and the kind of hyper rapid pace of AI adoption, maybe independent, maybe correlated with capabilities or perceived capabilities. I'm kind of curious about how you guys see that. I can imagine it makes certain risks a lot more dire. Like I'm thinking of the cybersecurity risk that you mentioned, Don. I don't know how much worse that gets when, everyone is using ChatGPT for their individual use, or multiple institutions, governments, hospitals, schools are using, these large language models. So I'm kind of curious about how AI proliferation or adoption affects these safety risks, or how you guys think about that.
So for AC, we definitely don't define thresholds when we work them out in terms of compute, or we definitely, first of all, its capabilities, but then calibrated by talking to national security bodies and so on for the catastrophic misuse stuff. So that certainly has to factor in threat modeling, which includes many different kinds of actors, and then how many you expect them to be, and all of that stuff. I think for loss of control, it looks different because you can get loss of control risks prior to significant external deployment, either just during training, or if you do purely internal deployment, which is sort of low scale in the sense of customers, but high scale in the sense of consequence. And so I think you absolutely can't get that if you just do compute, then that's wrong. They're correlated, but weakly. But I think that's not how we think about thresholds. I think it's closer to the policy framing. I think the main thing is that it gets very complicated because for different risk models, the kind of the threat actor space is super different. So for cyber, I think say for example, cyber and biological weapons, the level of expertise that you expect the initial risks to come from might be super different depending on the profile. And so that is a long conversations with people that are much more expert than the internal AC.
We are almost close to time, so I'll have time for only one more question. I'm sorry, a lot of people are raising hands, but.
Hi, I think a lot of the current problem and risk are really a legacy of how we train these models. Because, AI is our own creation. I want to see a clean slate way of training it. It's just essentially this is like taking constitutional AI to the extreme, where the highest priority, the meta objective is, AI should benefit humanity, right? With this objective, you can do pre-training, post-training, this object overrides every other objective, right? I mean, if you look at, it's from the data, we can actually using this objective to actually filter out data that, that conflict with this objective, right? One of the panel thoughts on this.
We don't know how to do that. So that would be great if we could do it.
So filtering data, I don't think is going to solve the fundamental problems of the kind I talked about. Once you have knowledge and you know how to reason with it, you can do bad things.
Right, but you check with the meta objective that you should benefit
but that
humanity.
has to do with intent, right? So you have to make sure either we don't build those machines or that they have the right intent. And right now, we're not doing, we're building them and they have bad intent.
Let's thank the panelists. All right, thanks everyone. We have this workshop going on until Friday.